On today's episode, Dr. Liz and I are joined by relationship and sex coach Keeley Rankin to talk about one of the most important and often avoided topics in marriage, sexual intimacy. We discuss 5 sexual personality blueprints, why many couples become touchless before becoming sexless, and what thriving couples do to keep that connection strong. We also unpack mismatched desire, why couples drift, and simple ways to keep meaningful conversations about intimacy going. Keeley is a sex and relationship coach based in San Francisco, California. She works with individuals and couples who want to embrace their innate desires, build sexual confidence, and fully realize their sexual potential. She received her master's degree in counseling psychology. She's trained in Hakomi therapy, recreation of the self, and a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. For 7 years, she worked closely with the world-renowned author and transpersonal psychotherapist, John Wellwood, who coined the phrase spiritual bypass. Keeley is a mentor to budding new sex coaches and also an online course creator. She has a new course, Keeley's Sex Class, that helps support people who are single or coupled, shed old blocks, and step into their full sexual selves. She is featured in publications like HuffPo and Oprah Magazine. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey there, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection podcast. I'm Dr. Dave here at Utah State University, alongside Dr. Liz Hale, our therapist. We're aiming to bring you the very best that we have in research and resources, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. And today, Liz, we're tackling a topic that touches almost every couple at some point. I would say every couple at some point, but it isn't always an easy one to talk about. In fact, research suggests that many couples struggle with it behind closed doors. We're talking about sexual intimacy, why it fades, what's normal, and how to find your way back. Joining us from Virginia is sex and relationship coach Keeley Rankin. Keeley, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you both for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here and talk about this huge topic.
Yes, huge topic indeed. And yes, we're so grateful to have you, Keeley. We're excited to dive right in. Can we start with a term that gets used a lot? At least I hear it quite a bit. Maybe it's not always understood fully, but when people say sexless marriage, what does that actually mean? Does that mean zero sex?
Yeah, so it sort of depends. In the literature, there's different definitions. There's one definition that's saying sex is happening less than 12 times a year. And then there's other definitions that say zero sex for more than 6 months. So I think it sort of depends on how you place it. But I can tell you the folks that are in sexless marriages definitely know they're in them. That's for sure.
Oh, it's painful. It just sounds painful. So my understanding, I thought it was once a month was you were having a sexual connection, but it's less than 12. I see. So 12 and more.
Mm-hmm. 12 and more, some people would consider as not sexless. Less than 12, some people would. And others would say if it's more than 6 months without sex, that you're in a sexless relationship. So,
and then there's the couple definition, right? The couple's definition. It's so personal.
Right. That's why I say if you're in one, because I think it's a matter of that couple deciding or that individual person deciding like, hey, this feels like we're heading towards or we're in a space where we're not connecting erotically. We're not.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find it, I'm curious, Keeley, is it more often when you said one or both? I can see sometimes being like, hey, we're both happy with this. But do you find that it's more often one person?
I would say one person normally tracks it earlier, like right around the people that I've worked with. I would say it's like right around the 3 months. It starts to be like, hey, we haven't been sexual in a while, or it feels like there's a lot of time spanning between when we're erotic or feeling like we want to go to those places. And then normally once the discussion starts, the other person is like, yeah, I can see why you think that. It feels like our sexual connection time has gone way down.
Dave makes a good point. So if two people are agreeing on their sexual frequency and neither one have an issue with it, that's probably okay, right? No matter what the numbers are saying.
Absolutely.
It's more the rejection, I take it.
Right. And I think there can be a lot of times in the idea of a sexless relationship or a sexless marriage, this over focus on frequency. And it's one of the things I normally talk to couples about. It's like, okay, so we're really talking about frequency here, but how is the sex when you have it? And so sometimes one of the routes out is to figure out, like, really, what's good about the sex that you are having, or also like what's not going great about the sex that you are having, and how can we look at some of those pieces? And sometimes that's a pathway back to couples being more connected.
I really like setting those two quadrants apart. I think that's really quite lovely. As you've worked with couples, Keeley, how do relationships typically drift into sexless marriage? What are some of the common pathways have you found that lead us there?
Right. Well, I think we mentioned, as we all kind of like smiled at each other, if you're watching this on video, when Dave, you mentioned like every couple will touch this. I mean, I really truly believe at some point all couples move into this space of questioning frequency, because when we leave the honeymoon phase, which is the first meeting of our romantic partner, we go through this honeymoon phase. There's all these different components that draw us into that person, hormones, all these different things that also sort of like push that eroticism together. And as we move into what my mentor, John Wellwood used to say is the real relationship, we move past that strong drive and desire. And the real relationship is where we start to figure out what is actually sexually possible, what the capacities, how sex is going to go in a couple. And there's ebbs and flows. And I think that's one of the things we don't really talk about enough in long-term partnerships is the ebbs and flows. There's sicknesses, there's family members having crisis or losing mom and dad. There's so many different components. Kids is a huge space. There's hormonal changes as you move through life with people. There's all these different changes. And so one of the main pieces I think that couples don't talk about enough, or that we don't talk about enough, is how sex looks over the arc of a long-term relationship. And it's actually one of the original things that drew me into the field of sexuality, was trying to understand this arc of long-term erotic connection and how do we move through it, because there's so many ebbs and flows. And now we have this term sexless marriage or sexless relationship, and everyone panics and, is my marriage over? Versus like, oh, okay, we're just in a lull here. Yeah. And how big is the lull? And how, are we talking a Grand Canyon? Or are we just talking like a small little divot and coming back together? And I think if more couples thought of it as like, oh yeah, every couple at some point has to have a conversation about this, versus something's wrong, like this is a crisis, we've got to turn everything upside down and figure out what's going on. I think it would make it a lot easier for couples to navigate this territory, because I think sometimes when we talk about it, the way it gets talked about in society right now is like one person comes in as like, we're in a sexless marriage. I listened to this podcast, or I read this book, or I heard this thing. And there's so much energy behind it. It can scare the other partner. It can scare them away from wanting to engage. It can feel like a lot of pressure, which is a huge, like, I don't know anybody who's ever been turned on by pressure. Like,
let's talk about a turn off. That would be one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's so many people that are actually experiencing this, but we don't talk about it enough. And we don't give, I think, these resources into like, how do we talk about, how do we navigate out of it? What are the places that we can turn to bring back that erotic connection, and giving space for our partners to change? Because the person you were having sex with when you first met, the person you were having sex with that you married, the person you're having sex with now, these are different people. Their bodies are different. Their desires are different. The way they connect is different. Your relationship is different. And so we have to make space for that in eroticism, which I think is often very difficult for many people to navigate the nuances.
All good points.
Mm-hmm. We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of this, of the phases of life, and sickness, or transitions, or stress, or things at work, and all kinds of things are happening in their lives. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that. And they're like, well, that's not really me right now. Maybe I'm just feels like every time we get into bed, she just rolls over every night, or I try to touch her and then she's gone, and we feel like we're in this relationship rut. If for couples who are listening right now who might feel like they're stuck in this space, they're not sure what to do, or if we talk about it, it ends up getting anytime we discuss it just kind of blows up. And so maybe we don't talk about it at all. What does the path out look like? And again, it's probably individual, right? Is there something that can be rebuilt? And if so, how? Where do, I guess, Keeley, couples start with the conversation?
Yeah, I would say the first and most important thing is to don't think you're going to have a one and done conversation. Like, I feel like I'm just like a repeating statement on that, because this is an ongoing conversation. I mean, we say our sex life, but it's really like it's a sexual world, and it's how we're creating the space for us, for both people to show up erotically and feel fulfilled. So why sex stops? It's like sometimes there's a relationship issue. People aren't feeling safe. They're not feeling close. Number one, people have to feel safe in order to want to be erotic, or even to be able to be erotic. So sometimes there's an intimacy missing piece, or the context of the relationship, or the way the relationship is moving is one person doesn't feel safe, so they don't want to be close. Sometimes it's a piece where the type of sex that someone is having doesn't feel good. It never felt good, or doesn't feel good anymore. Their bodies have changed. What they're looking for has changed. Their desires have changed. So there needs to be a conversation around, like, what are you looking for in the bedroom? Other times it is stress. More often than not, I think, like, in my experience, like 90 to 95% of people under stress do not want to be sexual. There is that small percentage of people who are like, I feel stressed, but I still want to be sexual. But they're rare. So we cannot forget just life's circumstances. And when we look at, like, coming back together, how do we start to come back together? I think if we hold it in this space of open curiosity and not a one and done conversation, there is not necessarily a quick fix, because we're looking at this a whole lifetime together. It's opening up the conversation. So I normally don't recommend for couples, like, if you've been trying to reach over in the bedroom and you feel like your partner goes cold, that's not really the place to have the conversation. It's to either send a text message or to ask in a loving and open way, like, hey, I want to have a conversation about our sex life or what's happening in the bedroom. When would be a good time for us to talk about this? Can we set aside time? And then we just start the conversation asking, like, hey, I'm wondering if you're still feeling satisfied. It feels like when I go to reach out, or it feels like you don't reach out anymore, because sometimes there's there's the pursuer and the person who sort of says, like, yes, I'll respond. I want to be seduced. So there's the pursuer, the seducer, and the person who's being seduced. And so each person can bring that up and say, like, hey, it feels like something shifted and changed. Like, can we talk about it? I think coming first with curiosity versus the accusations and the blame, and knowing that if you've never had a conversation about sex, if this is the first time we're talking about sex, which is a frequency, seems like we're not having it as often, it can feel pretty overwhelming. So it sort of depends where the couple is coming from, but starting with a conversation outside of the bedroom and just asking, like, hey, it feels like we're not connecting as much as we used to, or as much as I would like. What's going on? But the biggest mistake I think couples get into is making this frequency thing an argument or a fight or guilt. So one person feels really guilty or blamed, like they're doing something wrong because they're not wanting to, versus honoring their own bodies and figuring out, like, what's actually going on, what's actually happening inside of them around their desire for engagement versus their desire to pull away.
So is there something positive to do with frequency, with paying attention? Keeley, I'm just curious.
I think it's a marker that the average person wants to have because they're wondering if they're normal. Whenever I meet, we just moved to the East Coast from the West Coast. And so whenever I meet people now and eventually they figure out what I do, I always get pulled aside, normally like on the way to the bathroom. And someone's like, hey, this is how often me and my partner sexual? Like, are we normal? Like, we all want to feel normal. We don't want to feel like something is wrong or like we're broken, like our couple's broken. And there's this idea that if you're having frequent sex, it's going to ward off divorce or affairs and sort of like preserve the closeness of the couple. And part of that is true. When both people say they feel sexually satisfied, oftentimes that means the couple will last longer, will feel sustained longer. There'll be less, issues within that system. Yet I really try and steer away from, even when I get asked that on my way to the bathroom, I try and steer away from like, this is what healthy, happy couples are doing, because it does come down to what is everybody happy with. And those phases, it's like, I have a 4-year-old at home. And so the sex life that my husband and I had prior to me getting pregnant versus now having a 4-year-old, it's very, very different, but we both feel really happy with the time that we get to, the time we make, really, to be real, we have to make time because we both have decided on that. And now, would we both be happy with that, in 5 years? Probably not, because it changes, but that's that ongoing conversation versus feeling like everything has to be figured out right now and everything has to stay the same. And really staying curious. Like if your partner feels like they're pulling away, it's staying curious, like, hey, what's going on? Like I'm really interested in your eroticism, who you are as an erotic person. Can you tell me what do you think might be happening? And sometimes people don't know. Like you could go to your partner and say like, hey, I feel like we used to do this thing. We used to feel really close. It used to be really easy. I feel like I come towards you now and it feels like you're not interested. And sometimes people can point to it like, oh, body and image or dryness, or I feel like I'm not, my performance is down. I'm not staying as hard as I used to, or, certain things like that. But other times people don't know actually. And so that's where this ongoing conversation becomes so important of like, hey, let's keep thinking about it. Let's be curious. Like, what do we think is going on? Are you still masturbating? Do you still, are you still finding erotic energy elsewhere? I mean, there's so many questions to ask. There's no shortage of questions, that's for sure. It's just a matter of staying curious and being interested in your partner and trying to figure out like, who are they erotically and how do you meet them? One of my favorite resources for couples is this woman. Her name is Miss Jaya. She's, I think, in Colorado now, but for the longest time she was out of LA, and she has a Goop series. So I think that's HBO. But she created this model. It's called the Erotic Blueprints, which is very similar to Gary Chapman's 5 love languages. And so she moves through these 5 blueprints. And I feel like for couples, assuming we're not in relational territory, we're not in just like stress territory, and we're not in like, hormone, menopause, different things happening medically. If we're talking about specifically like how people want to be touched or how people want to play, her erotic blueprints are incredibly a helpful resource to start to talk about sex in a more broad way. Do you want me to go through them real quick? I can probably do it quickly.
Yes, I've never heard of this. Never heard of this.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. No. It's amazing. Her stuff is really, since I found it, I guess like 5 or 6 years ago, I end up talking with almost all my clients about it and all the people who stop me on the way to the restroom. So the first one is an energetic. So energetics are people, if anyone's ever heard the word Tantra, the Tantra folks fall into that category. So it's oftentimes slow. They're the type of folks who can feel energy. Like if someone walks into the room, they can notice that they're there. It's like if a hand comes in, they can feel that hand coming in. They tend to like, there's a light energetics and dark energetics, but the light energetics tend to like eye contact, breath work, sort of this like slow, long, almost meditative spiritual experience. And if it feels like hands are coming too quick or energy is coming too quick, they can sort of shut down, and they really want like almost like long drawn out erotic experiences. It could be lasting like 2-3 hours. I was working with this couple the other day, and I've been working with them, I guess, at least a year, but on and off before that for other reasons. And at some point we got into a conversation. Their discussion actually was primarily around frequency and the idea around sexless marriages, because their relationship has dabbled in and out of that. But at some point we got into a conversation about time. And I asked him like, well, what, they were going back and forth about something. And I'm like, well, time are we talking about? And her preference was that sex lasted between like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And he was like, well, sometimes I get bored, I mean, it was this real conversation. And so it's the energetics are really, really drawn, not all of them, but they can be really, really drawn to these long curated experiences. The sensual is people who are really into ambiance, lighting, smells, textures. They really care about like what's on the floor, music. They like long, slow touches on their whole body. Same as the energetics. They don't want anything to happen too quickly. They don't want their genitals involved right away, but they can get really distracted by everything else above them. So it's like, oh, I got to do this thing and I got to do this thing and I got to do this thing. They'll stack everything else on top of erotic playtime because everything else just sort of gets categorized as more important. They're list people. So if you're listening and you're a list person, you may be you may be a sensual. Sensuals also get really weirded out by fluids. They can be like very uncomfortable smells and fluids. They can just get like turned off, like if someone's chewing with their mouth open, or they're just very, very sensitive to the whole ambiance. And I always ask if I get a sense someone might be a sensual, I ask them like, is your best sex in a hotel room? And if you answer yes to that, you normally have a bit of the sensual in you, because they really love nice hotel rooms where like the rest of the world is shut out and they just show up with their bag. They can finally relax.
So that's kind of why I hear about hotel room sex. I think, what are they talking about? I didn't really understand.
Yes. Okay, well, you might not be a sensual.
I guess I'm not. I guess bad. Can't none of that. So that's very interesting, though. But I can understand just the peace of a hotel room, right? No clutter and just ease and beauty. I get that. I can get that.
It's curated. The hotel room is curated for your comfort, and sensuals love that.
All right.
The third one is a sexual. The sexual is what I think most men get sort of categorized by, is like, we do A, B, C, D, or however long we go. It ends in orgasm. Orgasm is very important. You kind of don't break that model. You just go through it. And the sexuals have this attitude of like, what's the big deal? Like, we just do sex. We just do it. Like, they're very genital focused. They like to go right for genitals. They are sort of just like, sex is easy in many regards for them. They see naked body, they get turned on. They're the folks that's like, if you ever tell them you're at a nudist resort, they'll be like, was everyone having sex? And it's like, well, you can be around nude bodies without having sex with them. But for the sexual, it feels like that's just like how it goes, right? Like I was driving in the car the other day with someone, and we were somehow got into a conversation about the blueprints. And I said, if you see your wife naked, what happens? And he's like, well, I just want to have sex with her. And I was like, well, you're definitely a sexual. Like, it's just sort of how the sexual's brain goes. But the sexual can be really judgy. They can judge the other blueprints as like weird, or like, why would someone want to do that? Especially the one we're going to get to, number 4, like that's odd. Or they can sort of like shame other people's desires, because for them, sex is so simple. They don't really see a reason to like make it more complicated. The fourth one is kinky. And I sort of wish it was renamed taboo, because it's anything, people drawn to anything that is, their eroticism is sort of like drawn out by anything that hits into that kinky taboo category. So for some couples, that could be like sex in the kitchen. And for other couples, that could be all the way into a BDSM scene. So it's just anything that feels like it's like hitting that aspect of like, should we really be doing this? I'm not really sure. This is kind of naughty. Like, that is the draw for the people who are in that kinky category. And their shadow side is, if they don't get that sort of edge of like, I don't know, should I do this or not? They can shut down and sort of not find the erotic energy. And the fifth one is a shapeshifter. So a shapeshifter is a person who wants to do all of these things. So like 1 minute they're doing eye contact and almost no touch or feather touch. And then the next minute they want impact play and spanking on their ass. And then the next minute it's like they're just like enjoying their body and their skin and their partners like blowing on them. And then the next minute they want direct genital fucking. Like they're sort of like moving through all of those spaces. And the shadow side of the shapeshifter is that they can fall into their partner's blueprint. So if you're a shapeshifter, but then you end up with a sensual, eventually you'll probably get a little like not bored necessarily, but feel like you want more. And so there can be this struggle in a couple if like people don't have this language, which most people don't. It's like, how do we start to talk about what people are wanting in the bedroom? and opening up this space of like, okay, like there's all these things that you can do in the bedroom, all these different ways that you can play. How do you want to play? What are you interested in? And then we start to communicate with each other.
Wow. I had no idea.
It's great, isn't it? The blueprints are fantastic.
So energetic. What was number 2?
Sensual.
Sensual. There we go. 3 was sexual.
4, kinky,
taboo, and 5
and
is
shapeshifter.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Well, zoning out a bit, Keeley, how important is sex in the overall health of a relationship? Does it fit right alongside emotional connection, communication, friendship?
Yes. So in the modern relationship, I would say that most couples believe that the physical relationship is really important. You know, I always think of it as like, what does each person in that couple want? How important is it for them? I think there's the science on it, right? Of like the people who are in sexually satisfying relationships feel more satisfied in their couple over time. But for some people, sex is not important. And I don't know that it's really like, I don't sit in the position of like, this is the right way to do relationship. I sit in the position of like, what works for each person. And the couples who show up in my office are often the ones where one person, it feels very important. That's why they're there. And potentially the other person doesn't understand or doesn't feel like sex is as important. And so I think there's this question if that I think is where it becomes really complicated, because I think there's plenty of people who can have a loving, connected, beautiful, strong marriage, and the physical intimacy is not that important to them. And I don't think that that makes that person's couple less than another couple who's more sexually engaged, because you can definitely be sexually connected, but have no emotional intimacy or, you know, lots of breaking of trust in all sorts of different areas. And so I don't think that it's necessarily like, this is the right one way to do relationship. But I think the piece becomes if one person says, sex is really important to me. Physical intimacy is really important to me. This type of connection is really important to me. And the other person says, I'm not sure if it is. It's figuring out with that other person, is there anything that we can do to make sex feel more interesting, more fun, more appealing? That's I think really what it comes down to. I'm curious, what do you guys think?
Well, I think there's so many benefits to a sexual connection, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't there a lot of research even just on the physical benefits of orgasm and release? And I think that's just so fascinating. But I do think that there's no two marriages are alike. You know, when a couple marries, it's like this marriage is going to be unlike any other marriage. So I love hearing what you're saying, that I think it gives a lot of credit to individuality and what two partners feel is best for them.
Right. Well, we stop comparing, right? Because it's such a huge pitfall of so many people. We end up comparing to what we see on social media and thinking we're not doing it right. But I will say the piece around orgasm, we can do that alone. We don't necessarily need another person to provide orgasm for us. So, but I agree. I do think there's a lot of benefits to staying physically connected to your partner. Does that have to include sex? I think it's dependent upon each individual person, what they need, and not shaming either way. Because I think when I have couples that show up and one person says like, this is super important to me, I don't want to be in a sexless marriage. If this is going to be sexless, I think I'm going to leave. And another person is saying, you know, it's just not that important to me. It's like, we don't want to shame either way, because then we get into the pattern of the person who's saying, I don't think I want to do this, feels pressure. Right? Like suddenly they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to give this to my partner. And that's not sexy. It's like, it's really, and that's where when I talk about like, how do we bring these topics up and why it's so important to not come with pressure or like, this has to change right away, or this is a fight or I'm blaming. Because the instant that person who's like, I'm not really sure where my sexuality is or how important this is, if we start to pressure people into like, well, you've got to figure out how to do this, it's a really tricky pattern to get out of, and it can cause a lot of relationship damage, actually, just overall.
So if a couple listening, Keeley, who they've decided that sex is just really not all that important to us, I certainly have those couples in my practice. They need not be ashamed that they're a sexless couple, right? Or would you even categorize them as that?
I sure. I mean, but it doesn't matter, if it doesn't matter for them and they feel good about their connection, then that's all. I mean, really, that's all that matters.
Often, I think for Keeley, as I'm reflecting on this in our own relationship, I feel like my wife and I, when things are going well in every other aspect of, our friendship is great. We're doing these small little things. We're laughing. We're going on date nights and making time for each other. We're managing stress well. We're healthy and sleep and excuse me, all those other areas. It feels like that it's almost like the natural extension of the relationship. All these other areas are going well, then that area tends to go well. But it feels like sometimes when we're off or there's a lot of stress or our schedules are crazy. We feel like we're drifting emotionally, right? Not checking in, barely even checking in during the day or seeing each other even at night when I get home. It feels like then it spills over into the area of our sexual relationship. And so I can see some of that when things are going well in life and in our emotional connection, then naturally it feels like, oh, yes, this is a good place to be with our sexual intimacy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for, obviously I get trickier couples, right? The people who show up in my office are the ones where it's like they figure other things out and the sex still isn't happening. And I think what's so is so interesting about eroticism is that there's many people out there that can feel connected in so many different ways. And the erotic space still doesn't feel like it just falls into line. And so I want to just name real quick, because I think part of talking about this is de-shaming some of these situations. Because I think, yes, sometimes there is we can point to real places within a couple where it's like, yeah, that doesn't seem like, we need to work on that and the sex will probably fall into place. And there's definitely couples where it's like they are, they've got everything going. Everything feels like it's working really well. They feel really connected. And sometimes the sex doesn't just pop on. And so it becomes this question of how do we deepen our understanding about sexuality? How do we start to have these conversations and really look at what is sex for each of us? What do we want out of it? What would be fun and exciting and inspire us to be more playful, more open in that way?
Mm-hmm. We talked a little bit earlier about frequency, and I agree. I'm not a fan of it just brings up comparison and that kind of keeping track and score and all of that. So I'm going to flip another question that came to my mind, and that is, if you had a microphone, you had all the the women in the room, for example, across the world, and then you're able to go in another room and you had all the men in the world. Is there a message, I guess, that you would suggest for men and for women, and separately, and what would that message be if you could have each of their ears for a second?
Oh, that is a great question. Okay, let's think. So I think my message for women would predominantly be around to let yourself begin to create a deep, deep relationship with your sexuality, what it means to be sexy, what it means to be sexual, the parts of your body. I'm cautioning myself around saying different parts because depending on your blueprint, you'll have a reaction. I use the word, but energetics and sensuals will have a reaction to that word. So I'm always cautious now these days, and I'm on podcasts about saying too many graphic words for those blueprint types. But it's around really learning your body and finding your own confidence to express that, to get out of this space of waiting for your partner to pursue you, feeling like you're not able to pursue, and letting yourself more deeply connect with that sensuality and that sexuality and learn how to communicate about it. Because I think in modern day, there is still this pressure, especially when women get married, of like, I need to perform this for my husband. If I don't do this thing for my husband, he's going to leave. He's going to have an affair. If he doesn't get it from me, he's going to get it elsewhere. And that pressure, that feeling of like, well, he made a bid for sexuality, I just need to move forward with this, over time can erode a sense of who that woman is and her desire to even want to engage in sex. And so that would be my message for a group of women, of like, find that internal connection with yourself and nurture it and foster it and keep being curious about it over time. I think for men, it would be more about taking a deep breath and sort of the same thing, like take a deep breath and know that one situation is not indicative of your whole relationship, right? One bid for, okay, I went to go seduce my partner and she turned me down. It's like, take a deep breath and sort of ask yourself like, okay, how was my approach? What was happening in my approach? Did she seem busy? Did I just come out of nowhere? The way I approached her, has she told me many, many times that doesn't work for her? Did I go for an ass slap? Right? Like that typically for most women, by the way, men, does not work. Like they don't really like just having that. Some do. Very occasionally I'll say that in a session and the woman will say like, actually, I kind of like it. Like it's a cute thing, but in general, most people don't. So it's sort of around slowing. I think for men, it would be around slowing down, thinking of this as an ongoing conversation and not putting so much pressure on each individual experience, right? It's like, if it feels like your partner is starting to pull away, or if it feels like your partner's coming on and you don't want it, it's like, just taking a breath and finding a connection to yourself and then coming forward.
I like that. I remember years ago, we celebrated an anniversary and she was really tired. She fell asleep and I was devastated, right? And I was upset and internal. And then the kind of this bigger picture is like, oh my goodness, what am I doing, right? But we have all this time together and there was all this pressure on this one night, right? Celebrating our anniversary. And so looking back, at my previous self, I'm like, okay, come on, Dave, right? What are you doing? Yeah. In this, anyway, I was making too much of a big deal out of, this one occasion, this one night. Yeah.
It can feel that way, right? Like everything gets built up. And I think sometimes women do comparison for different reasons, but sometimes I think men do a comparison out of fear, right? Like, this is our anniversary. We're supposed to have sex tonight. And if we don't, it means something is wrong, or other guys are having sex tonight. And like, I'm not a man. I mean, there can be so much wrapped up in that frequency access piece. So it can be good to just like walk back and ask ourselves, like, what is good sex? What would good sex mean for me? Can I take a breath and work towards it versus like rarely is a quick fix the solution to anything, right? Like we know that with almost everything in life. There is no quick fix. It's an ongoing relationship and conversation.
Well said.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
When you look at long-term couples, Keeley, those who've been together for years, even decades, what does a healthy or typical sexual relationship actually look like? Or is it just going to be based on these two partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is based on each person. I think if let's just go with the couples that sex is really important to them, because let's take the category of people who it might not be. But I think couples where sex is really important, I'd say what sex has become is adult play for them. There is an openness and a playfulness that normally exists around sexuality and in that couple, and a free-flowing relationship within their hearts and their bodies. Couples are often sexless long before, or touchless long before they become sexless. So there is this whole component of like touch, like the touch stops. And then, so one of the pathways I think back into being more erotic is to move through touch, is to let touch come back in all of these different ways. And so there's, in the couples that feel like they're erotically connected, or the couples that I've seen where I'm just like, what these, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what you're doing in my office. Like, I mean, I'll work with you, but like at some point I'll probably be like, you guys are good. You don't need to see me. There is just this openness within their heart and this openness within touch. And there is also a lot of emotional vulnerability. There is a closeness and a sharing that happens where they just know what's going on in each other's bodies and in their brains. And they can almost like feel osmosis, like, okay, yeah, like that was going on. There really truly is like this deep exchange of closeness that is happening for those couples. And I would say, for the couples that have long-term erotic health, they also don't necessarily view it unless they're sexuals and they view it in orgasms. But it's really this like sex is throughout their whole relationship. It's the way they wake up in the morning together. It's the way that they share breakfast together. It's the way they move through their day. It's how they greet each other. They don't necessarily think of it as just this act of taking their clothes off and their genitals being together. They're really spreading it out. So there almost is like this weaving through where sexuality just exists within them in the way that they share. Maybe they're not like on the arousal scale and heading towards orgasm, all day, every day, but it's a really, really easy exchange. And I think one of the main things that happens is that there's easy asks. Each person can ask for like, hey, I'm feeling really turned on right now. Like, do you want to come play? You have time to play, or should I take care of this myself? And there's this feeling of like, oh yeah, okay, I've got, 20 minutes or whatnot. I'm not really feeling like I want my body to be touched, but I'm happy to touch yours, or I'm happy to be there for you. There's just this exchange of like seeing the other person as an erotic being and knowing how to hold your own boundaries of what you want, not feeling that pressure that we talked about, and just being able to flow with it where everyone can ask for what they want and everyone can hold the boundary and just move between these spaces together. It's not like, oh, you masturbated, that must mean something's wrong with our marriage, or why didn't you come to me first? There's just an openness around it, an openness of sharing fantasies, an openness of sharing these turn-ons, all of these pieces. It just has this flow about it.
Mm-hmm. What about keeping the spark alive, Keeley? We often hear a lot of couples be like, you talk about the newlywed years, and this is all, normal to kind of experience this gradual, fall or coming back down to earth, a real relationship you talked about. Are there things, what do you recommend to couples, I guess, I'm thinking more of the little things in that relationship to keep that spark alive? Suggestions that you have for couples?
Yeah, I would say one of the most important things I think is tending to the well-being of your partner. So, how we speak to each other, how we show up, staying out of the blame game, staying out of the hypercriticism, staying out of the stonewalling. I think that allows for more fluidity around sexuality. And then when we think about like bringing the spark back in, I think a lot of it has to do with curiosity. So it'd be staying open in your own mind and body, sexuality around what turns you on, and then communicating that and bringing that into the couple. If we don't have this stable base where the relationship is strong, because I think the mistake people make is like, oh, we're going to bring the spark back, but there's no energy between that couple. They're living totally separate lives. They're not doing things together. So it's getting back into that space of like, how do we allow the couple to get back connected? And then we bring back in the curiosity. If you believe in my idea, which is that we're always changing erotically. If we stay curious about our own sexuality and we stay curious about our partner's sexuality, there's endless opportunities. There's endless places to go. When I think of like what is a balanced erotic couple, I think of it having like these 3 parts filled out. So there's the romantic relationship, there's the intimacy, the heart center, there's the sensuality, the erotic embodiment. That's like the physical body, the touch, the way that we feel in the body. And then there's the fantasy or anticipation space. So it's like what are we, what's inspiring us? What's sort of like captivating our brain in that way? When we think about like the beginning of a relationship, that anticipation was so prevalent in so many couples, right? When, where are we going to go for dinner? What's it going to be like? What am I going to wear? Like you're just in your mind playing out all of these potential places of anticipation. Over the arc of a relationship, we stop anticipating as much because we feel like we know it. And so a big component of bringing that back is allowing for enough spaciousness and curiosity that anticipation space comes back online. Esther Perel talks about this a lot with like creating space in the couple, and that space the way I think of it is like that space can create the anticipation. But there also has to be communication around it, because space without communication just feels like, people are neglecting the couple. But it's being willing to try new things, to bring new things in a way that feels safe. Like if you've never played with sex toys and suddenly you come home and there's like an array of sex toys on the bed, it's probably going to freak your partner out, right? But it'd be that conversation of like, hey, like, I've just been wondering, like, what would it be like for us to go together? Or if you don't feel comfortable going to a sex shop with me, or you don't have one available, like, can we look online and see if we can find something and then try it out? Everyone's starting in a different place, but I think it's really having that curiosity and bringing what you're interested in into the couple.
Mm-hmm. And very good. And maybe as a follow-up to that, Keeley, what do couples who do maintain that connection, what do they tend to do differently than everybody else, maybe?
I think they're probably just nicer to each other in general.
That goes a long ways, doesn't it?
They respect each other more.
That goes a long ways, the kindness.
Yeah.
Yeah, Keeley, that's funny that you mentioned that. We were on a trip in Hawaii, kind of a romantic place. And we're overhearing this couple just kind of snapping at each other, just the tone of voice, the kind of the criticism, the little jabs here and there. And here they are, it's supposed to be the most romantic of all places in the world, Hawaii. And yet, just their tone. And I couldn't help, and of course, try to be slow to judge on my part, but just kind of tuning into that little part of it. I almost kind of hurt for them, you know what I mean? Because I thought, that those little jabs and things that can spill over, obviously, into other areas of their relationship. And for sure, if they're still feeling that kind of animosity or that stony or that icy silence, that distance that it creates, it definitely affects the relationship.
Yeah, resentment. I think resentment is such a major, major killer of erotic energy between a couple, right? And it can really be built over those like jabby kind of places. And I think it's important to say, like, almost all couples end up in that space, because from time to time, right? And it's a checking of yourself. I have to check myself all the time. Like, the tone that we use, the expectations that we carry, the resentments that build, and making sure that those are really being minded and that you're holding yourself accountable for good behavior, I think is a big component of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
It's beautifully said. Well, Keeley, you work with struggling individuals and couples, but you've also created some beautiful online courses as well. Please tell us about those and where our listeners can find out more about you and all the things you offer, please.
Yes. So the best way to find me is probably on my website, which is KeeleyRankin.com, KeeleyRankin. And I do have 2 courses. So the first course we made was a course for men who struggle with early ejaculation. And the second course I made was a course called Sexless. And it's sort of everything that I've learned over my 15 years of working with people. And I put it all into this class because I felt like, actually, I had a really long wait list and I just couldn't manage it. I ended up taking on mentees, but the wait list kept growing. And so I was like, I'm going to make this course so people can get access to information without having to wait and go through the whole process. So if you are a couple that's in a sexless marriage, Sex Class could be a really great place to start. There's tons and tons of information and like learning about your body and self-care, all of these different places to give you ideas and inspirations and lots of different conversations that you can have that would definitely open up a few areas for sure. You can Also find me on Instagram. That's my most active social media platform, which is Keeley Rankin Sex Coach.
Oh, nice. Okay. We'll add those to our show notes for easy access. Thank you, Keeley.
You're welcome.
For sure. Keeley, hey, before we let you go, we like to ask all of our guests a couple of questions. The first, in honor of the name of our podcast, Stronger Marriage Connection, what do you feel like is a key to a stronger marriage connection?
Is it cliche to say communication?
No.
Is that what everyone says?
Yeah, no, their answers are all over the place. But yeah, that is so.
Yeah, I think communication, keeping the lines of communication open and continuing to talk. I think as long as people are continuing to talk, there is a path forward. It's when the talking stops that I think the bigger crisis becomes true.
Yeah. Yep. So true. Second question, last question for you is, we call it a takeaway of the day. Is there a take-home message you hope our listeners will remember from our discussion today?
Yes. Here's my take-home message. My repeating statement, or I guess clause, or something like that. The thing that I really, really, really want people to know about sexuality is that your sexuality is not static and your partner's sexuality is not static. We are evolving and changing and growing. And the path to having a full, balanced sex life is to stay curious and to get out of comparison and to move past this idea that there's a quick fix, or it's one and done, or we have one conversation and everything is fixed. These are ongoing conversations about your ongoing and changing body and your ongoing and changing pleasure and what feels sexy for you. So taking a deep breath, taking the pressure off, figuring out what is fun and interesting and sexy for you, learning how to communicate that, which is, many years of experience and training, but we can all get there if we give ourselves that space and that time.
Well,
that's my message.
Well, Keeley. Yeah, Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway of the day with Keeley Rankin?
Yeah, thank you for that message, Keeley. Well, what strikes me a bit is that we become touchless long before we become sexless in our marriages. So I love this notion I'm taking away, Keeley and Dave, touch more and be kind more. I really love that. Dave, what about you? What stands out most to you from our conversation today with Keeley Rankin?
Yeah, all kinds of things. I think it's been such a helpful discussion. I think many couples will resonate with this. They hear, man, I've been kind of stuck in this relationship rut. I think, you've got to have the discussion. You got to be able to talk about it, because many relationships, they just suffer in this silence, and then it turns into, the resentment that we talked about, kind of this silent distance that then grows between them. So at least begin talking about it. If you need help, reach out. There's all kinds of resources, classes, professionals, counselors who can provide help along the way. So you're not alone.
Books, lots of books.
Lots of books, all kinds of books, resources. Yeah, thanks, Keith. And podcasts and other things I think there's more resources out there today than any other time in history. So reach out and do it together, because it's worth working on that friendship and then talking about things in this area of relationship. So important. So Keeley, thanks again. Thanks so much for making time to come on and share so much of your experience, tips, and wisdom.
You're very welcome. It has been such a pleasure. I always love coming on, chatting with very smart people. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And to our listeners, that does it for us. We will see you next time on another episode of Stronger Marriage Connection Podcast.
And remember, it's the small and simple changes that create a stronger marriage connection.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission